but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that. Number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, I made it clear as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read I'm not being a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speeches, why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
You're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things.
Okay,
They're two different things. And he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's attacking Ukraine?
Because it will so weaken his country that he'll have to make a very, very difficult choice as to whether to continue to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
You said in recent weeks that big nations cannot bluff when it comes to something like this. You recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that a step that you're prepared to take? And if not...
It's not a bluff. It's on the table.
Sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President?
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President, if I can, you detailed some severe and swift new sanctions today and said the impact it will have over time. But given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions we imposed have generated 2/3 of the world joining us. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working. Yes.
Can I ask you about Zelensky? Sir, you spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
There is a complete rupture right now in U.S.-Russian relations if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War, that depends. You have the vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing, from Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his defense.
And are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment. No. Yeah. No. He's had his hand up a long time.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into other countries, and the U.S. will have to get involved if he moves into NATO countries?
Well, if he did move into NATO countries, he will be involved. We will be involved. The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened. Look, You know, well, anyway.
And can you talk anything more about your conversation? Mr. President.
Why not sanction Putin directly today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States...
Sir, India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much.
All right, that's President Joe Biden speaking to the media about Russia's full-on invasion now. Airstrikes, explosions have been heard. They've attacked the north, the east and the west of Ukraine. So Russia has invaded Ukraine full-on, and this story is now unfolding. The United States and its allies, the rest of the Western world, essentially now a full-court press in terms of sanctions. Joe Biden, they're saying that these sanctions are going to be severe and are there to make sure that he's not emboldened, so that he doesn't spread beyond Ukraine. But to help us unpack the U.S. response and what's been playing out in the last few hours, we're now joined by our correspondent in Washington, Nick Harper. Nick, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We, I suppose, suspected that this would come. Some were still thinking that maybe there was a diplomatic road, but it looked more and more in the last few days that Putin had made up his mind. He's finally done it.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Good evening. It is something that the US president, that the Biden administration has been warning about for several weeks, that President Putin was planning to invade Ukraine. And within the last few days, we saw the United States changing their rhetoric, saying that Putin had made up his mind, that it was definitely going to happen. Now, we saw some other countries suggesting that perhaps that was hyperbole, that it was over-the-top speculation from the United States, some countries playing it down, but the US were committed to that assessment that they made throughout, that an invasion was going to happen. And that is what we saw unfold at dawn in Ukraine, late night last night here in the United States. President Biden had an opportunity to speak to the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, by phone as that invasion began. And in that, President Biden promised that he would rally international condemnation. And that is what we've seen happening here in Washington during the course of the day. We're now into the afternoon. It's 2 p.m. here, but it's been a busy day so far. We heard the president speak just a few moments ago, but he started off the day with a National Security Council meeting at the White House in the Situation Room, and then had a video call with the leaders of the other G7 countries, trying to rally that international support, that international condemnation, but really try and work out what the next steps would be to tell President Putin that the Western countries were against his actions, were condemning it, and as we heard from the US president, that it was a flagrant violation of international law.
So what is the United States response? We hear about sanctions, but what do they mean? He's sounding as if that these will be severe and anybody who's associated with Russia will be guilty by association and punished equally.
Well, absolutely. And that is what the Biden administration has been working on over the last few days. We've now had 3 straight days of sanctions. On Tuesday, they sanctioned a number of Russian banks. They also cut off the Russian financial system from Western financing and targeted some of the Russian elite, the oligarchs in the country. We then headed into Wednesday, the US president sanctioning the company behind the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That was the pipeline that was meant to supply Germany Germany with Russian gas. That project is now suspended indefinitely. And within the last few minutes, we've heard the president there speaking about new sanctions that they are outlining today, including blocking 4 major banks. He said that one of them had assets in the United States worth $250 billion. Those assets in the US are now frozen. He said that other elites would also be targeted in this fresh round of sanctions. He said that Russia would be cut off from half of its high-tech imports, that its aerospace program would be degraded, that it would be harder for it to build ships. He said all of this would be a major hit on Putin's long-term economic ambitions. It wouldn't just be something that would hurt Russia over the next few days. The president said that this will have lasting effects for the Russian economy. The president making it clear that Putin chose this war. The president saying now he and his country would bear the consequences. But as we heard at the end of that press conference, some questions from reporters as to what comes next. The president is suggesting that there will be more sanctions down the road. Reporters asking, well, look, why don't you just go ahead and throw the whole range of sanctions at President Putin now, rather than this slow trickle effect? So, yes, there will be questions as to whether the West is doing enough. The Biden administration says that these incremental impacts will have lasting impacts on the Russian economy, but potentially more sanctions in the coming days.
All right. So you say war, but the reality is the war is going to be happening inside Ukraine. And for as long as Putin stays inside Ukraine, the West is unlikely to engage with troops.
Well, absolutely. That's what the US president has said throughout. President Biden has made it clear US troops will not be entering Ukraine. However, they are around Ukraine. They are in the NATO countries like Poland. Several thousand US troops have been stationed there. President Biden has said that if Putin were to enter any of those NATO countries, that is when US troops would be prepared to defend, in the president's words, every inch of NATO territory. But because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and remember this has been part of the issue throughout over the last few weeks, Russia wanting guarantees that Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. Because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, the NATO countries, the Western countries, the United States included, are, like you say, having to watch it unfold in Ukraine. They aren't entering themselves. And that is why we're seeing really the only 2 other options when it comes to response from the US. International condemnation and sanctions. They are not getting involved militarily, and they won't unless President Putin steps out of Ukraine and enters NATO territory.
All right, so he's busy trying to get, as you say, the G7 members together. But he's struggling with the aspect of the SWIFT banking system. It sounds as if Europe isn't totally behind disconnecting Russia from this SWIFT system.
Well, absolutely. And because you have to remember that there are benefits for those European banks. The US and NATO and the European Union says that there is this united front, but they are running into complications in some of the countries when it comes to presenting that united front, to making sure that all of them are pulling in the same direction. I'm sure that they're working behind the scenes to try and unblock some of those problems, but until they do, there will not be that total united front that they are promising. And I think that's potentially why we could see more sanctions, to make sure that they are using the full range of their abilities to target different areas, industry sectors of the Russian economy. And I think that's something that's likely to filter through over the coming days.
All right, so what else? Has Russia been responding? Has Russia said anything in the interim?
Well, remember, Russia throughout said that essentially they were provoked into this conflict. Provoked, they said, by Ukrainian forces shelling parts of those 2 regions, the separatist regions backed by Russia that broke away earlier this week, and also provoked by, Russia said, by the United States and other Western allies, saying that there would be this range of sanctions if Russia were to invade. Russia, within the last hour or so, have said that their invasion plans for today have finished, that they have managed to take a number of key locations within Ukraine, and in terms of their military operations, at least for today, they are on pause. We are beginning to see Ukrainian forces fight back to try and regain some of those positions, so potentially over the coming hours there may still be fighting. The Russian troops who've...
All right. All right, that's Nick Harper reporting there from Washington, giving us an update on what the US president has been telling the media and what America's response is going to be. And at this stage, it's going to be an escalation in terms of sanctions that are going to be put on Russia. And as